welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the programme where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of experts. And joining me today is John Howard, a regular contributor, property developer, author, public speaker, mentor and a myriad of other things.
That's very kind of you to say so. It's good to be back.
Okay, good to have you, John. Good trip in?
Very good trip, yeah.
Great stuff, okay. And joining John for the first time is Singh, who's CEO of RentID, which is a company providing a sort of software platform for landlords, I believe.
That's correct.
Okay, welcome Dev.
Thank you.
Don't be frightened, we don't bite.
No, not yet.
Not yet, okay. All right, John, I'm going to give you the first question, which is this. I have recently received a significant payoff from an insurance claim for an industrial action, which precludes me from carrying on my previous occupation, which involved a considerable amount of physical work. My thoughts have turned to property as my source of future income. I have to decide whether I want to purchase a number of buy-to-let properties, or actually my preference would be to perhaps develop a small block of flats. I realise that both activities need different skill sets, but both require careful evaluation of the geographical area in which to invest. Could the experts help me with guidance on me understanding the different ways of assessing an area's potential? I'd be most grateful for any help or advice. That's quite a deep one, isn't it, really?
We could spend a whole seminar on that virtually, couldn't we? So obviously this person sounds very intelligent, which is
It's a good start.
It's a good start, isn't it? Most property developers, remember, in the old days, they're only property developers and they couldn't do much else. So these days, there's a new breed of property developer. All these young, aspirational people coming into it are far brighter than the older ones. But that brings its problems because sometimes they overanalyze everything, and when you overanalyze something, sometimes you can't see the wood from the trees. So sometimes it's best not to overanalyze these things. However, the question is, from what I can understand, is where they should invest and what they should invest in. They're the two questions.
Well, and how you identify that particular area?
Well, first of all, the buy-to-let market is a very simple way of investing in property. Very, very simple, very straightforward, and it's passive really. So if you don't want to get too involved, you can do so. And over 20 or 30 years, these properties are have gone up in the last 20 odd years, 5% a year on average. Obviously they drop and they come back up again. But that's a very safe, steady way to invest. If you're looking to purchase or develop a block of flats, that's a totally different set of skills you need. And you're looking really to make a margin on the build of those flats. So in other words, they'll stand you in at less money than a buy-to-let will in terms of yield. So you'll get a higher yield if you get your hands dirty and do it all yourself and build it, than you will if you just buy off-the-shelf houses on one of these portals. Now, so two different skill sets. Very hard to do start building blocks of flats if you've never done it before. If you're going to do that, you need some serious advice and some serious consultants to help you and advise you to make sure you don't trip up. In terms of area, these days there's so much information out there on the web about certain areas, and one of the figures I look at is crime rate figures in certain areas, because that will identify the rough areas as well as the good areas of a city, and look at the demographics and look what is likely to happen in the next 5 years in that city. Birmingham, for instance, in the next 5 years, they're saying there's going to be a property growth of over 5% a year, and the population growth is going up also. And that's important because if you go to the northeast, for instance, population is going down in some areas. Well, how the hell are you going to rent your properties out if the population's going down? So there's all these things have to be looked at, but they can do an awful lot sat at a desk online these days.
Well, it seems there's three factors there. Buy-to-let would seem then, on what you say, to be something that you can do yourself.
Safest, yeah.
Building the flats, you're going to need a team.
You are.
And thirdly, you're going to, whatever you build, whether you build or whether you have buy-to-let, you're going to have to make sure that your product, whichever one it is, fits the demographic, aren't you?
Without question. And of course, a dev specialist area as well comes into it, because you've got to manage the thing after you've built it.
What have you got to add to that, Dev?
So I was going to say, as John said, research can be done, but it's the most appropriate thing is just make sure your due diligence is done on the areas. Everything can be found out, crime rates. Just look around, take a walk, take a wander. I know it sounds so primitive, but it's as simple as that. Because if there is new blocks of flats going up from other developers, there is a reason why they're being built. They're not being built by chance. And if you're taking on a building, let's say you're building a 5 to 6 unit block, are you really going to be in a position to provide a end product which is better than a big developer? So your yield or your expected yield, your time, everything will always take longer, it will cost you more. That's just the way things work. So why would you push one unless you are absolutely set up for it? And I would say financially absolutely set up to run the distance, compared to buy something and step into buy-to-let. That in itself is difficult enough if it's not done correctly.
But it's very simple, isn't it, Dev? Out of everything in the property world, buy-to-let is the simplest. That's why the banks will give you, the cheapest rates and everything else. And that's the other thing, Stephen, actually, we didn't mention, was if you're going to develop a block of flats, if you've got the cash, that's fine. If you haven't, you're going to be paying 7, 8, 9% interest while you develop it. You then need to refinance it at the end, because that'll only be short-term lending. Whereas obviously buy-to-let, you might be at 2 or 3%. So that needs to be taken into account.
I still think there's factors where you just have to, don't underestimate what happens afterwards. As you said, when you go into the management and then you want to exit, let's say they're building to keep and then sell on eventually. Yeah. What else is going to be built by that time? 5 years, as you said. Yeah. What are you going to be selling against?
Dev, I particularly like what you said about go and have a look at it. I mean, I can remember over the years I've done...
Late at night as well.
Yeah. Well, I've done so much work for banks who've said, could you go in and look at this? We've got a developer, he's gone wrong. And I go back to the bank and I said, did any of you go and look at this before you lent the money? And they, oh no.
Just some basic research.
There you go. If you had gone to have a look, you'd have never have lent it in the first place. There we are. Okay, well, good advice from you both. Thank you very much for that. Dev, your question is this. I found a property I wish to buy, and this will be for my own use. The slight downside is that an existing assured short-hold tenancy is currently in place. The tenant's lease goes on for about 9 months after I'm required to complete on the purchase. I'm happy that the tenant stays on for that period and my bank have agreed. It just suits me time-wise. However, there are terms in the tenant's lease that I do not like. Because I will be the new landlord, can I either issue a new lease for that period or alter the terms of the existing one?
Okay, it's a really good question.
Good luck with that one.
It's actually really simple. With issuing or altering, what reason would a tenant, given that they just entered into an agreement, so in the first quarter, they've already agreed to those terms once, why would they be interested in renegotiating any terms in a new agreement? But I think the way to treat it as a landlord coming in is, look, there's a great situation here where you can walk in with a property earning some income and become a landlord, but you cannot underestimate the legacy issues that may be there. So you've almost got to treat it as a new let completely. You're going to be inheriting all the information or anything that could have possibly not been done correctly at the beginning of that let. Tenants referencing, check-in procedures, inventories, everything is going to be passed on to you responsibility-wise. If you have not checked that and you haven't done it, you're walking into a world of problems because, as you said, this person wants to move in 9 months' time. But we all know that rent arrears can come through. And my experience, it's always in the last quarter of the tenancy, last sort of 3 months of the tenancy, that suddenly, oh, my washing machine wasn't fixed on time, I'm no longer happy. Or a problem comes in, it's more vocalised at the end of the tenancy because it's time to get your deposit back, or a further problem's about to start. So I wouldn't underestimate walking into something like that. You do all your checks as if it's a brand new tenancy. You ensure that you go and speak to someone. A lot of people just don't do the basics. Speak to the tenant, speak to the landlord, and then go from there. Yeah,
it's a long time since I've got involved in any direct letting, but I seem to remember...
Because you're spoilt like me, Steve.
Because I'm spoilt.
Someone else does it for you.
But I seem to remember it's a sensitive issue about when the notice to finish that assured tenancy is given, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the solicitors will help you in regards to transferring. over the original let and how the rental is split and so forth. But Section 21, as we know, there's coming issues with that. And you may have to issue a Section 8. You have to be prepared for the worst. So has the tenancy been set up accordingly so you can finish that at the time expected? Unfortunately, there is always small elements which can be missed quite easily, just going from basic credit referencing and checks which haven't been done competently, and they will cause you issues at the end, no doubt. When you come in to move into your new property, wear and tear, anything that you may be thinking you're ready for, it's never so simple. I'm sounding very negative, but you should always prepare for that.
And there's plenty of checklists on the web, aren't there?
Absolutely,
that you can go
absolutely.
through?
There is nothing that you cannot Google nowadays or you can't check up online, and there's plenty of help out there. It's free help as well, free help and advice on how to do things. Your solicitor obviously will do things, but I always think any landlord stepping into a space right now should take the initiative themselves to check everything.
Dev, something I just wanted to expand on with you, really. I just, because of the business we're in, we look at the blogs and we look at the things in the trade press around about property, and I'm seeing more and more landlords not going through agencies. I see more and more landlords trying to let their properties direct. What are your thoughts on that?
So over 50% of the market already do it. They barely turn to agents.
It's amazing. I can't believe it's that high.
It's over 50%. Already only go to an agency for the basic services or try and do it themselves anyway, using limited resources. I'm going to be very careful here and say, look, a competent agent always will have a space, because they've got the experience and they've got the expertise, they understand legislation. Unfortunately, we live in a world just like any other climate that they're not willing to share those, or maybe they don't have those skills in the first place. So you should always take control of your own tenancy. There should not be a point, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a full-time, you travel full-time, or whatever you do, there is not a point that you shouldn't have some sort of transparency about what's going on. So self-management is the only way forwards. Let alone what happened last year. You should be doing it yourself. There is no way that you shouldn't be taking some sort of format. If you're lucky enough, like you both are, where you don't have to, you can provide it to someone else and they'll do it very competently for you, amazing. But knowing something about your own tenancy...
Don't be looking at me, look at
No,
me.
I was looking at both of you. But if you can just take a bit of control and, like I said, have a bit of transparency with the tenant, the relationship is better and you will always benefit from that.
But again, just going back to our sort of pre-show chat, it's very important, even on a single buy-to-let, for somebody to understand they're going into business.
Absolutely.
And if they're not prepared to treat it as a business
sure.
and follow the disciplines through, then don't do it. I mean, I think
people forget what they bought it for in the first place. If you bought a property as a buy-to-let, you're buying it for a pension or you're buying it for, it's an asset.
I agree, Dev. The amount of people I speak to and say, well, of course, it's only really my hobby. It's not really, I said, there's no such thing.
It can be a very dangerous hobby if you get it wrong.
Yeah,
and it can easily go wrong.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for that. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show. Join me again after the break. Welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and joining me are John Howard and Dev Singh. Welcome back, gents. John, your second question, I just know you're going to love this one. If the panel started with a clean sheet,
yes,
what would they do to assist young and first-time buyers nationwide?
If I started with a clean sheet, that's an interesting question.
It's a very big question, that one, I think.
It is a big question.
How would I help? I'd like to think I've spent 40 years of my career helping first-time buyers because we've developed an awful lot of flats and houses for first-time buyers to buy. So, and this government can't do any more for first-time buyers, Stephen. Goodness me. It's got to be the kindest, the most respectful government to first-time buyers in the world. We've got the Help to Buy scheme where they can invest short term in order to borrow 15-20% of the deposits. We've now got Rishi Sunak has come out and it started last week, I believe. 95% mortgages guaranteed by the government. I mean, what else do first-time buyers want?
John,
Goodness me!
Let me just stop you there.
Yeah.
You say 95% mortgages. What else could they do?
Well, what else can they do?
Hold on. When I bought my first property, you could have 100%. 95% was the norm. It's only Mr. Cameron and Mr. Osborne's austerity and instructions to the Bank of England.
Stephen, with respect to your age and my age, we were paying 10% interest on our mortgages when we first had them. Oh. These guys are paying 1.8% or something. Well, it's unbelievably cheap. And I understand London is expensive. I stayed in Chelsea last night, whatever, very expensive area. However, you can still buy a nice home in this country for less than £100,000 if you are willing to travel. If you're willing to travel.
Well, I've had a look around here and there's not much for 100,000.
No, there isn't. But I said, if you're willing to travel, there's areas of this country where you can buy a nice home for £100,000.
And where would you find a nice home for 100,000?
Many places, and not as far away as you think from London.
But you know, you've got to equate that to the amount of jobs that are around
and the average wage in that area. I accept that, but there's some nice areas of this country that aren't a fortune to live in. They really aren't, and that's what people forget. They all want to live within, 1 mile of mum and dad. Well, with all due respect, your mum and dad have worked very hard over the years in order to buy a house like that.
But even at a 5% deposit, okay, and you go to your area where you find houses for £100,000, but now that's still £5,000 deposit, and in an area where houses are £100,000, my guess is £5,000 would still be quite unattainable for a lot of people.
I accept that completely. But should it be, it is a privilege to own a home in the UK. It's a privilege, and a lot of people manage to do so. It's a privilege to have your own home. You have to, why shouldn't you have to save a small deposit to buy your own home? What is wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong.
To be aspirational and want to get on in life, there's nothing wrong with that.
There is nothing wrong at all. I think I'd take issue with you saying that it's a privilege to own your own home.
Well, it is a privilege to own your own
home. Well, in that case, it's not
everyone. It's a privilege because not everyone, unfortunately, can afford to do so.
No, but it'd be a privilege. Whatever you buy in that case, wouldn't it? You buy a new car, it's a privilege. You buy some new furniture,
this country is one of the best countries in the world. There's 60% of people in this country own their own home. It's a wonderful country to live in and to be proud of.
I still think, John, if you turn the clock back even 10 or 15 years, the ease of buying a house was there, especially for young people. You know as well as I do that there are certain firms that specialised in these, multi-unit developments that were specifically designed for first-time buyers.
Stephen. I'm not saying there wasn't, but there are still places for first-time buyers now. And I come back to the fact they're paying less than 2% interest. They're getting a 95% mortgage. The government, on the Help to Buy scheme, have supported these first-time buyers for years because they know that is the key to keeping the property market going. John, is the bottom end needs to be moving. It needs to be moving, churning all the time.
Again, we've had this conversation before. That Help to Buy scheme helped developers far more than it helped the people that were buying.
I'm not saying I didn't have a smile on my face when they introduced it. However, it's helped 500,000 people get on the property ladder. What other country in the world has done that?
Okay. Dev?
Privilege, again, I would question privilege, just the terminology, but I do understand the concepts. I understand. And however, in regards to just assisting first-time buyers, there is a lot of help out there, a lot. And the government is doing a lot. One thing, and pro-developer or not, one thing I would definitely say is that... one thing I would definitely say is that you should have to sacrifice something to get onto the property ladder.
Sure.
Okay? That's
a bit of hurt.
That doesn't mean that you're less. You may choose to rent for your entire life, and that's what you're trying to do. Yeah. But the government is doing a lot now. Comparing, and again, whether this is showing my age or not showing my age,
showing my age probably.
Comparing it to years ago, I think is unfair. All right? Because
why is that?
Because. And this is in your favour, I think it's a very different time, a different place. And there was a lot of negative drawbacks back then as well. I knew people that got into problems financially from they were taking too much money out of their property. They were they were getting, you cannot do that nowadays. All I would say with first-time buyers is, again, understand what you're getting into. You cannot underestimate. This is you might be paying £1,000 a month, £1,500, £2,000. It's a £500,000 asset. You can't underestimate what that takes. And you should not do it until you're financially ready. So all I would do is make sure with any help to buy schemes or any government assistance, it is absolutely clear. Okay, not just now, oh yeah, it's all flashy now, 5% deposit, get in, buy. Yeah. But what happens to you in 10 years' time? What happens later on?
It's a little bit like the shared ownership, isn't it?
I was going to mention shared ownership.
It's very easy to get into, not quite so easy to come out of.
Yeah, but for a lot of people, shared ownership works. They can buy a minimum 30% of their property. You know, you can go and buy a flat in Battersea with 30%.
But this shared ownership,
it's not bad, is it?
This shared ownership years ago was called something different slightly. And I had a personal experience with someone that worked with me. She'd worked all her life. She ended up owing money on a property. Yeah. You know,
and that's the terrible shame.
There's misfortunate situations, and again, it's because things weren't so clear.
I do think overall we've got to be very careful, because if I think with the sort of Cameron era, there was almost an acceptance that rental was going to be the way to go, because it was the same as Europe. Europe don't necessarily believe you should own your house quite so much as we do. But of course the danger is if you're on a fixed, shall we say, an ordinary level salary path throughout your life, the problem is when you get to retirement age and you've been paying a normal private rental rate, you get to finishing work at say 65 or whatever it is now, and how are you going to pay on a state pension that private rent?
Absolutely.
You're going to say, can't stay here anymore, I'm going to need local authority or government help. And that's just going to become a burden on all of us. So I'm all for encouraging ownership. I'm just a little bit cautious about how we do it. That's all.
I think there's plenty of, as I said, plenty of assistance and encouraging it for sure. People should be encouraged to buy. However, they have to make an educated choice about it. That's all it is.
I think that's a good point. Dev, I think we'd better move on to your question.
Sure.
Right. I'm a new buy-to-let landlord and was lucky enough to find my first tenant very quickly. However, although my estate agency undertook credit checks, 3 months on, I'm not getting any rent. I was charged a 10% fee for finding the tenants and a further fee for the credit check. After making some inquiries, the employer the tenant gave as a reference does not exist, and they apparently had no previous record as tenants, as they said they'd been working abroad. Have I any recourse to the agents for the money lost, and how easy will it be for me to repossess my property from these delinquent tenants?
So
you probably get this every day, you do.
It's a common question, unfortunately. So let's deal with the issue with the agents first. Recourse is a big word. I think people underestimate again how you should avoid that at all costs. It costs money to do certain things. It costs money to go to court. It's not something you just choose to do, and it won't take something else from you. Your time, your effort, mental strain, whatever it is. So you should avoid that. Now, in respect of an agency, they have to cater for you. They have to, if you've gone to them for a service, they have to have taken all reasonable steps, and that reasonable steps is the key element here. If they can prove that they took all reasonable steps during that referencing, during the credit checks, it's very unlikely you're going to be able to do anything or get any recourse from them. There are schemes out there like the Property Ombudsman and so forth that you can turn to if you feel particularly that the agent, after complaining to them, that they haven't treated your complaint seriously enough. But again, they will do the same thing. Has the agent done everything reasonably sound to check that tenant? Now, you already said that the tenant, the employer reference was fraudulent, so it was. So the agent probably would have been misled as well, but they would have tried to do it. Now, on the other hand, you have got a situation that you can serve Section 8. And Section 8 is because you've been provided false or misleading information, and that would be the grounds to serve Section 8 for that tenancy. Again, unfortunately, you'd have to go to court.
And that's served on the tenant?
Served on the tenant. Okay. In the current climate, you'd have a bit of a nightmare because court action and evictions are so delayed and overwhelmed with what's happening. But in a normal situation, you could serve that 4 weeks later, you'd have an eviction order and you'd be able to repossess the property.
Sure. Okay, all right, well, thank you very much. John Howard, Dev Singh, thank you both very much for your contribution today.
Thank you.
That's all we've got time for, so join me again next time on Property Question Time.